I think if you're a hardcore fan, there's going to be a lot of unpredictability in this year's draft.
The city's on fire thinking maybe Ashton Genty's going to be there. Do you think he's there at 10 with all you've learned in the last week?
No.
I didn't think so.
Thanks for the time.
Yeah, I think, well, a couple things. Like, I think, if he were to get down to that range, I think somebody would trade up for him, maybe Denver. And I'm starting to think that the likelihood is that he doesn't even make it there. I think he could go as high as 5 to Jacksonville guys. I think as we get closer, it's one of those things where, and I think this is like us sort of catching up too a little bit to like where the league's at, and then also like the last sets of meetings that teams are having where it's like, you start to look at it and it's like, okay, if we're looking at a tackle, what's his ceiling? The 10th best tackle in the league, right? Like if we're looking at an edge rusher, his ceiling, the 15th best edge rusher in the league. And then, you look at a back who, you have the normal questions you would with a running back. Can we get a good one later? Is he going to last? All those things. But, he, I think, has the potential to be one of the, top 2 or 3 backs in all of football, And so, I think that's sort of what teams are looking at. It's another way to help your quarterback. I think there are good examples of it in the past. And, you can see, what Todd Gurley meant to Jared Goff early in his career, what Zeke Elliott meant to Dak Prescott early in his career, just as far as the development of those guys. And, it's really easy to see where you can talk yourself into it, especially, if you're a team like Jacksonville that wants to stabilize things around your quarterback, or your team like Denver that wants to, help your young quarterback get to the next level.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Cap.
I just wanted to ask you one other thing about Genty. Is he that much better than all the other backs when you really factor in pass protection?
Yeah.
Travion Henderson or Omarion Hampton or who's the kid you like, Hoodie, from Iowa? Caleb Johnson.
Yeah. So that's a matter of opinion. I would say that's split. I've talked to people who think Genty is special in a once in every few years type of back. And there are certain things you see that are off the charts, like his contact balance, that sort of stuff. And then there are others that think Hampton's close to him, that Hampton could go in the top half of the first round too. I think with Henderson, we're talking about something a little bit different, where this is like Bijan Robinson versus Jahmyr Gibbs, right? And I think they were in the same class, if I remember right? That was 2 years ago.
Yep.
They were in the same class.
Yep.
And so if you remember that, I think it's a perfect encapsulation of the difference, where, I think with Bijan, you can build an entire offense around him, and you feel like, okay, this could be like a 1,700-yard rusher, and a guy that, every time we break the huddle, the defense is worried about him getting the ball. And that exists in Gibbs, too. It's just different. You know what I mean? So I think if you're looking at a Genty or a Hampton, you're looking at more of like the Bijan Robinson, where with Henderson, you're looking more at the Jahmyr Gibbs.
You wrote it on SI.com about this draft class. Albert, as you well know in sports, just sometimes it just doesn't work out. This past NBA draft, all the international players and no one's really emerged. Sometimes you just have years like this. What did this remind you of based on your research of other drafts?
What did I say? Remind me.
22, the 22 class.
Yeah. Quarterback-wise, you're saying. Yeah. The quarterback-wise, definitely did. And I remember that year, and we had Pickett at the top, which I don't think Pickett was the prospect that Ward is, but you had Pickett there, and then after him, you had this group of players where I think everyone was assuming they were just going to come off the board at the beginning of the second round, and that was Desmond Ridder and Matt Corral, and there's one other one that went right in that third round range, and I'm blanking on him now, but everybody assumed those guys were going to go. All right, day 2 starts, those guys are going to go in the 30s, and then they're still there 75 picks in, And so I'm not saying that's going to happen. I think some will go somewhere between 20 and 40, Shedeur, Dart. But I also would caution people that, in a lot of these cases, and if you look at the history of it, I'm planning on doing something on this again this week. I've done it before. if you look up like the number of quarterbacks who've been taken in the first round versus the second and third rounds, it's like disproportionate. Like it's just a massive number go in the first round, and then the numbers get really small in the second and third round. And the reason why is because if you view a quarterback as your long-term answer, right, this guy can be my quarterback for the next 10 years, you're not going to wait to take him in the second round. And if a guy isn't that, you probably aren't going to take him in the second round, if that makes sense. So,
Yes.
So I think that's sort of how teams are looking at this. And it's like, could you see Tyler Shuck or Shedeur Sanders or Jackson Dart? Could you see them starting a game? Sure, you could. Can you see them being your quarterback for the next 10 years? I think that's the question.
So, Albert, we had Bill Polian on, not recently, but, last couple years, and he was involved in the Bears coaching search when they landed on Eberflus. But in one of the interviews, he said, you have to evaluate a roster, how many blue chip, like he said, blue chip is they are among the elite at their position and they can win a one-on-one battle regularly. And he said you have to have 8 to 12 of those to be seriously, along with depth, to be seriously considered a Super Bowl contender. How many do the Bears truly have? And we made a list. Jalen Johnson certainly won. Joe Tooney certainly won. DJ Moore, potentially Kyler Gordon. But that's it because Caleb's not there yet. Rome's not there yet. Darnell Wright, maybe. Not yet. Dahlman, maybe. Brisker, maybe.
Stevenson.
Tyreek Stevens, maybe.
Yeah.
And who you draft this year. So do you think that's a good way to look at it?
Well, first of all, it's funny because, I think Polian is sort of giving his own team-building philosophy because if you guys remember, that's exactly how the Colts were built, where they had that layer of, 8 really elite players, and then kind of filled in the rest, right? Like it was Peyton Manning, Edgerrin James for a while, Reggie Wayne, Marvin Harrison, Tariq Glenn, Jeff Saturday, Robert Mathis, Dwight Freeney, Bob Sanders for a little while there, and then it was like a bracket, and then it was like a revolving door around those guys. So that is one way to do it, and it's not the only way to do it, but it is one way to do it. And I do think the Bears have, they at least have some promise that they're going to get there, and you mentioned some of the names. I mean, what do you get out of Tyreek Stevenson? What becomes of Darnell Wright? Like, I think those are some of the questions, Roma Dunze, like those are some of the questions that you have to answer before you know definitively whether or not the core that Ryan Poles has built is going to get there. But I think there's more promise than there was that they can get there a couple of years ago. Obviously, the big one's Caleb and how far Caleb takes it. But yeah, I mean, that is one way to do it. And, what ends up happening when you do it that way is those guys wind up making a lot of money, and then you have to draft really well around them. Like Kansas City's done that. Like right now Kansas City's in a spot where they're having to pay some of those guys like Creed Humphrey and Trey Smith and Trent McDuffie. Like those guys are coming up for contracts now. But, building that way is a great way to build, and you have this champagne problem then of having to draft role players around them and be good at that. And obviously Polian was really good at that over the years.
Albert, as far as Green Bay, Wisconsin is concerned, 5,000 hotel rooms in Brown County, plus another 5,000 the Fox cities of Appleton and Oshkosh, and like between Green Bay and Milwaukee, almost a 2-hour drive. What do you think of Green Bay as a host city versus others?
Well, have you guys been to Green Bay for a game day before?
Yes.
Like it is 10 pounds of you-know-what in a 5-pound bag.
Yeah.
So,
So true.
And I love going to games there. I say that with all the affection in my heart. But it does, it's not that big a place, So there is like that element of it does feel a little bit when they have a game there. It does feel like they're like a little overwhelmed, So I think it's the cool thing is to me is that this is like such a historic place. And I think one thing the NFL has really tried to focus on is what can we do for cities that are never going to host a Super Bowl, and the draft has sort of become the answer for that. Like we can give them a draft. And I believe Pittsburgh is next year, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Pittsburgh next year. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're having cities, Chicago got it. Chicago was the first one on the road, I think, right?
Yep.
So like these northern cities that are never going to host a Super Bowl, that you have this carrot for them, this thing that they can help the team build infrastructure and all that different stuff, and So I think it's a good thing from that standpoint. I loved it at Radio City Music Hall. I'm not going to lie. I was, I'm generally a little slow on these things, so I was kind of like slow to embrace it. But I think the idea of it being kind of an outdoor festival and all of that is pretty cool. And it's a good chance for the league to engage kids. I loved the draft when I was a kid. Loved. I don't know if you guys were this way, but I used to sit there all day on Saturday when it used to start at noon, and the first three rounds were on one day. And I would sit there all day. It'd usually be the first nice day of the year in New England, and watch it all day. And I think this is an effort to engage kids like what I was all those years ago, and this is a way to do it.
Albert, before we let you go, do you expect this to be a wacky, wild, draft, or do you expect, at the end of the day, it kind of all went pretty much to form?
No, I think it's going to be unpredictable. I just think, like, once you get past the Carters and the Hunters, look, I've changed a little bit. Like, I was, a few days ago, I was like, God, like, I looked at it and I was like, and I had the chalk in my head of Campbell to the Patriots, Graham to the Jaguars, Raiders potentially taking Genty, the Jets taking Warren, and now that's kind of been jumbled up and mixed up and looks a little different than it did. Like I think I told you guys a couple of weeks ago, Mason Graham wouldn't make it to the Bears. I think he could now, So I look at it like, I think if you're like a hardcore, like, this isn't going to be the draft for the drive-by viewer. The drive-by viewer wants receivers and quarterbacks. I think if you're a hardcore fan, there's going to be a lot of unpredictability in this year's draft. And so I think you're going to see some guys that are perceived as reaches, and then I think you're going to see some guys slide. And I think the Shador situation could bring as much drama as you could ever want. So I think it's going to be a fun draft to watch for the hardcore fan who's really locked in and knows who all these guys are. The casual fan, I think, probably will be a little less enthralled by what's going to happen on Thursday and Friday night.
Quick prediction: who do the Bears take?
Why don't you give me Mason Graham, because I just mentioned him? I think I want to say Kelvin Banks, because I think Banks is going to go somewhere in the top 10. I think a lot of people are missing the boat on him. I think he's going inside. I think so. If I had to guess right now with the tackles, I would say Campbell 4 to the Patriots. I would say maybe Banks 6 to the Raiders, and Bimbo 7 to the Jets. Mm-hmm. If Tyler Warren gets past the Jets, I think there's a possibility the Bears are looking at the chance to draft him too, which could be an interesting thing for your young quarterback. And I think Warren could be in play. That's a guy I wouldn't have seen getting there. I think Banks would be a definite possibility. They had a huge crew at University of Texas's pro day. I think Banks would make some sense. But why just to have fun and excite the fans a little? Why don't we give him Mason Graham? Because I do think Graham, if he gets past Jacksonville at 5, could slip a little.
As always, Albert, we appreciate the time. Thanks for coming on.
All right, thanks, guys.
There he is, Albert Breer, on our Yingling Hotline.
Devil works hard, but my prayer circle works harder.